our next speaker is somebody who has also a very storied career in technology and entrepreneurship. So Jasper Schulte is somebody who has been both a successful entrepreneur, a successful senior leader in both large-scale companies like TripAdvisor, but also like very entrepreneurial and small companies and startups like Snapcar. And he's going to talk about something very interesting, like how he's transforming like his personal hobby for skydiving and the lessons he has there into like his like day job. So his talk is going to focus on why should you fail more, and that is inspired by the passion from the concept of like failure and reducing risk while skydiving. So I'm very curious how like somebody going into skydiving is like teaching you the lesson that you should fail more, because I wouldn't really want to fail while skydiving. But I'm curious how like failing more and developing software is going to help all of us. So please all welcome Jasper Schulte here to the stage. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hi. So it was the 22nd of July in 2013 when I was above an airfield in Morcele, which is in Belgium, and I was falling towards the ground with 200 kilometers per hour when I opened my parachute at a height of 3,000 feet, which is approximately 1 kilometer. And I immediately understood that I had a major malfunction. I looked up, and my parachute inflated incorrectly, and it was due to a steering line that was routed incorrectly through the whole system. In my sport, we call this line-over malfunction. So I was still basically in free fall. At this height, it would take approximately 16 seconds for me to hit the ground. But I had a bigger problem because my parachute was inflated asymmetrically, which basically meant that it went into a violent spin. And I felt the G-forces increasing, and I knew that I just had a few seconds before I would pass out because of these G-forces. Hi, my name is Jasper. It was already a great introduction. Right now I'm Director of Engineering at Getir, which is the pioneer for 10-minute grocery delivery. But in my free time, I'm a skydiver. I've been skydiving for over 15 years, and in these 15 years I've done about 1,000 jumps. I've done regular jumps, that's me over there. I've done jumps in very big groups, that's me over there in the red circle. I've hung on the side of many airplanes, again, that's me. Together with my team, I became European champion, the red circle again. I did wingsuit jumps, which is, you know, those bird-like suits. Right now, you're looking from my helmet down, those are my hands, and the shoulders are on top. And I jumped out of airplanes inside inflatable boats, because why not? I will tell you this was probably the funnest jump I've ever did. So you might think, oh, right, he's like an unnecessary risk taker. On the contrary, I'm a necessary risk taker. So because of my devotion to this sport, I've built up this interest into failure and risk. And today, I'll try to share some of the things I've learned doing this sport and how it influenced my life as an engineering leader. So, because a parachute may fail, like it did that day, every rig, so the rig is the whole system, contains two parachutes. So first you have the main parachute, it's the one on the bottom, and then you have a reserve parachute, which is the one on the top. When the main parachute fails, you go into something which you call the reserve procedure. And the reserve procedure is something you do in order to first jettison your main parachute, because that one it's not working, right? And it's something that's in the way, and you actually want to get rid of it. So the first step is to jettison the main parachute, and then to deploy your reserve parachute. So you can imagine that doing this procedure, which basically means you have to pull two handles, that you train this again and again and again by every skydiver, so including me. But the thing is, I was always a bit anxious. On On average, a skydiver has to do its reserve procedure once every approximately 600 jumps. And I never had one before. I never had a catastrophic failure. And I was always thinking to myself, if I would have that catastrophic failure, would I do what I needed to do? Would I freeze? Would I do something silly that would only make the situation worse? So I talked to a lot of experienced skydivers, and the interesting thing is they all said the same. They said, I wish you had a catastrophic failure. And you will find out that you will do exactly what you need to do. So on that fateful day, I was about to find out that they were right. I looked up, I saw that there was indeed a very big failure and that there was no way to recover. And then something interesting happened. I was completely calm. So don't get me wrong, this was a very violent moment. I was basically still in free fall, spinning down to the earth. But I was calm. And I remember saying out loud, literally, you can hear this on the camera, oh wow, this is going to be my first time. Calmly, I grabbed both handles. I pulled the first, which basically jettisoned the main, putting me back in free fall. I pulled the second handle, opening my reserve parachute. It came out perfectly. It deployed in a matter of seconds, and the violence was over. I was flying calmly in control, my main parachute a few meters below me as a ball of useless fabric falling towards the ground. So that day I had a GoPro on my head, like any self-respecting skydiver has. So I could kind of relive the moment, and I could see how long everything it took. So it took me 2 seconds to assess the situation, seeing the big failure and seeing that there was no way to recover. It took me about 0.5 seconds to pull my handles, and it took 1.5 seconds for the reserve to deploy. So the whole process was over in 4 seconds. But that day changed everything. Before, I was always a little bit anxious before every jump, and it happened on my 750th jump. So those were a lot of jumps where I was just a little bit anxious. It wasn't about if I was trained, it was about whether I would do the right thing at the right moment. But I learned that the training worked, and I remained calm, and I did exactly what I needed to do. And it finally hit home what all these experienced skydivers told me before when they said, I wished you had your first catastrophic failure, right? I found out that day. So my engineering teams in my current job are responsible for a system that handles about 1 million orders during a busy day. So when things go wrong, the stress levels, they shoot up. Just teaching theoretics on how to handle these outages is not enough. I dedicate myself to building up their confidence so that they know that they can handle it. We play war games. We duplicate production environment and we let random parts of the system fail. But the key is to rotate. Don't let the most senior people always call the shots. Rotate the role of the incident commander. Let even your juniors take the role of incident commander during these war games. Key is not only to train the skills, but also to build up confidence with those people. Let people fail. You know, show them that failing doesn't need to be a problem, that they will be supported, and that the team will always find a way. So back to that day in Belgium. So I landed my reserve parachute in front of the hangar, and the drop zone instructor came up to me. It was basically kind of the boss of the whole airfield. So he put a pat, he patted my shoulder, and basically he said, "Congratulations, I saw it all happen, and you did great." Following by handing me a parachute and saying to me, "Here, you can borrow mine. You're on the next flight." And indeed, 10 minutes later, I was boarding the next plane. And I did a perfectly fine, uneventful skydive. And this sent a very, very strong signal. It showed that what happened was okay, and it was part of everyday life. In skydiving, after a reserve procedure, what happens a lot is, people did their reserve procedure. They land. They have a drink to calm their nerves. They talk to some people about what just happened. They pack their stuff and they call it a day. They go home and they start pondering what happened. They start reliving the moment. And every day, this gets bigger and bigger in their head, up to a point where they're too afraid to even ever jump out of an airplane again, and they drop out of the sport. So failures, they get into your head. I'm very happy to see that kind of in the engineering culture by now, blameless postmortems are becoming more commonplace. But they're often too late, in my opinion. They're maybe a week or several weeks later, and this allows these incidents to get into the heads of those people involved. So I would say do these blameless postmortems, but do them immediately, preferably the day after. It's all about making sure that people stay in a positive frame of mind. Because once you get into a negative frame of mind, it's very hard to get back into a positive one. So Dr. Alison Ledgerwood of the University of Texas did research on this topic, and she did a very interesting experiment where she informed two groups of people about, or two groups of patients about the success of a medical treatment. So they told the first group, this treatment has a 70% success rate. They told the second group, this treatment has a 30% failure rate. Technically, they're saying the exact same thing, right? So the group that got the 70% success rate, they loved the treatment. They thought it was going to be a good idea to do it. The group that got the 30% failure rate, not so much. They didn't really like the treatment. And I think this kind of makes sense, right? Like, I think this wouldn't be a surprise for many people. But then there was a twist. They said to the first group, yes, it has a 30% failure rate, it has a 70% success rate, but you can also see this as a 30% failure rate. And the group now no longer really liked the treatment. But when they said to the other group, yes, this is a 30% failure rate, but you can also see this as a 70% success rate, they still didn't change their mind. They still didn't like the treatment. And I think this tells us a very, very important story, is that it's easy to get into a negative frame of mind, but it's very hard to get out of one. Now, that we're talking about data, I want to make a small detour because I found this just a few days ago. And it has nothing to do with failure risk, but I just want to ask you. So does anybody know what it should be a red line, it's a bit dark red. I mean, I would be very surprised if somebody knew, so I'll tell you. It's the amount of complaints a scented candle company in the United States got. So just imagine, right, like scented candles, really nice things, and the amount of complaints they got. Now, can anybody make a guess what the blue line represents? It's the amount of COVID cases in the US. Just think about that for a minute. I thought it was very interesting data. So I got a new parachute, and I got onto the next plane. So let's talk a little bit about planes. Who knows what the strongest part of an airplane is? Anybody make a guess? It's the black box. It's the flight recorder. So the idea of a black box is that it records everything that happens on a plane. So in case of a crash, you're able to find out what happened and they can reconstruct. It's literally designed to survive a plane crash. So why isn't the whole plane built this way, right? I mean, it's designed to survive a plane crash. Well, I mean, probably the plane wouldn't be able to fly because it's too heavy, and in the best case scenario, it would just be very uneconomical to fly such a plane. So because of this, planes are built as light as possible. So basically, every plane is built on the verge of failure. Think about that next time that you board your airliner. So maybe, like some of you actually got in on a Boeing 737 on your way into Cluj, which is a very common airliner. So the fuselage, which is basically the tube-like body of an airplane, is made of aluminum. So can anybody guess how thick it is? you might think a few centimeters, maybe even half a centimeter. It's actually less, it's 1 millimeter thick. So think of that, right? This gigantic Boeing has an aluminum skin of 1 millimeter thick. So the only way to stay safe in such a case is to do very regular and close inspections. Like, as soon as a crack appears, it can get immediately fixed. But if you do this, you're able to make very light, very economical airplanes. So what can we learn from our engineering organizations from this? Don't, even in the case of security, over-engineer, right? Don't put in too much safety margin for a number of reasons. An obvious one, costs will rise, right, to build and to maintain such a system. But there's also something that is called the moral hazard, which is basically that if somebody feels overprotected, they become lazy and negligent. This is actually a very big topic in insurance, as you can imagine. So my point would be is not overprotecting to avoid failure, but monitor and inspect to detect failure early and act accordingly. So there's a reason that uptime isn't a part of the DORA metrics, but mean time to recovery is. For those unaware, mean time to recovery basically is the metric that says how long it takes between the discovery of a failure and restoring from that failure. If you're interested, by the way, in learning about mean time to recovery, like the only book recommendation I'll do today is Accelerate. It's basically, it did great scientific research in the performance metrics of high-performing teams. A few months ago, I also picked up a book, How to Stop Procrastinating. I haven't read it yet, but if I do, I'll let you know how it is. Good. So I did my second and my third and my fourth jump that day. I packed my things and I went home. And I met a friend, and I told the story. And he asked me, why do you do these crazy things? Why do you take such big risks? And I told him, well, the risks, they're not that high, right? We have very good statistics. 1 in every 350,000 jumps is deadly. But the numbers didn't convince him. He actually said to me, it still seems risky, which is interesting, right? Like, I get this reaction quite often. And there's a reason. Humans are notoriously bad at assessing risk. That's because we have a lot of cognitive biases. I'll name 3. We exaggerate unknown risks while we downplay familiar risks. So for instance, for our kids, we fear kidnapping of a stranger most, while actually the data shows that it's much more common for a relative to be the kidnapper. And most people know, and they still fear kidnapping of a stranger most. We exaggerate risks that are out of our control, while we downplay risks that are in our control. For instance, people fear flying. While the chances of dying in a lifetime in an airplane crash is 1 to 7,178, while dying in a car is 1 to 98. And this is, people are scared to fly, and they'll get in their car without blinking an eye. Even while driving a car is almost 80 times as dangerous as flying in a plane. People know, and you've heard this a lot, right? Like, flying is the safest way of travel, and still people are afraid to get into that plane. So, and the last one is actually quite relevant for my sport. We very much exaggerate spectacular risks, and we downplay very common, slow, boring risks. So, for instance, many people, when they swim out in the open sea, they fear in the back of their mind if a shark is going to attack. So worldwide, 10 people a year die from shark attacks. So that basically means you have a chance of 1 in 800 million to die from a shark attack. Or terrorist attacks. Like, if you live in the US, it kind of differs per country, but if you live in the US, the chance of dying from a terrorist attack is 3 million. And still, if people are in busy places, a lot of people are still scared of this terrorist attack. Well, when people were surveyed if they were worried from dying from heart disease, the majority said they weren't worried. But actually, the chance of dying from a heart disease is 1 in 6. But it's boring, right? It's a very slow, non-spectacular way of going. So people are not worried about that. So there's another good thing, and that's the availability heuristic. So basically, we base our sense on risk, how easy it is to recollect examples of that risk, which kind of makes sense, right? Like when we used to live in tribes where all the evolution of our brains happened, if you would hear a lot about tiger attacks, well, you know, probably there are a lot of tigers around, so the risk is high. This worked really well until newspapers were invented. Because basically, newspapers, by nature, they report rare risks. Because that's interesting to read, right? You know, common risks, not so much. You won't see in the newspaper like this person died from a heart attack, right? It's not interesting to read. So I always say, if it's in a newspaper, don't worry about it. And I think a lot of people can benefit from this. So why is this relevant for engineering teams? Risk is important when we're making trade-offs. We assess risk wrong, we make the trade-off wrong. We run the risk of getting risk wrong. I'll give you an example. So after 9/11, a lot of Americans, they actually decided to they took the car instead of the plane in the years after 9/11. I mean, kind of for obvious reasons, right? For long distances. And so the data show that actually miles traveled by plane decreased and miles traveled by car increased. In that period, there was actually not a single fatality with a plane crash, but 1,600 extra Americans died because they were traveling by car. So that's basically people taking a completely wrong risk assessment and paying for that with their lives. So how do we battle these biases? I think a very important thing is educating people about this. In the best case, they no longer have the bias, but sometimes it's very hard to battle. So at least giving people the knowledge that they have this bias will educate them, and they'll know that their gut risk assessment might be wrong. So most engineers, they'll be very vigilant about the site going down, right? That's a spectacular risk, right? You know, our site, it's not reachable, big crisis. But are they checking boring, very slow risks? Are they checking that because of a rounding error, maybe your platform is losing 0.5 cent on every transaction every day? Maybe they're not, you know, it's boring, it's slow, but it might have a lot more impact than your site being down for 30 minutes. So, and finally, please educate your peers around confirmation bias. I know that many people don't believe that it exists, and I would love to kind of convince you with arguments, but you would probably dismiss those anyway. So, I hope that I kind of broadened your view regarding failure and the risks associated with failure, and that you will be able to apply these to your engineering organizations. So let me close with a small anecdote that your words matter when it comes to failure. So I wanted my girlfriend to also experience the thrill of a skydive. So she booked a tandem with a tandem instructor. And this is how it works. So you get attached to an instructor as a passenger, and you get into the door of the airplane. So the front is the passenger and the back is the instructor. And what normally happens is that the instructor grabs on to the plane and he starts counting. He instructs the passenger that this is going to happen, and he just goes like, ready, set, go. And on go, he goes, and you both drop out of the airplane. So that day, something happened, and actually during the count, the instructor realized that he forgot his goggles. Which isn't a big deal, it's not dangerous at all, it's just a bit of a nuisance, right? Like you're gonna get some wind in your eyes, you might tear up. So realizing this, during the count, what happened and what my girlfriend actually heard was, ready, set, oh shit. She didn't have a very pleasant skydive. so your words do matter. Thank you for listening to me. Enjoy the conference, and thanks for having me.